What is anxiety and how does it affect you? At its base, anxiety is an overestimation of threat. It's an overestimation of the threat you perceive you're under. Now, fear is a very useful emotion, and fear is a bit different from the general anxiety experience. Fear is quite immediate, it's quite obvious, and it's quite strong. You recognize that there's something threatening, such as a tiger, and you either have to fight the tiger or you need to run away as fast as possible. Fear is a very useful emotion to experience, particularly, in fact only, if there's a really significant and serious threat to your physical existence or integrity. Anxiety is somewhat different though. Anxiety is nagging. It's low level. It's spoiling of experience. It's often undifferentiated. It's difficult to know why you feel anxious. It's ill-defined and often diffuse. It's a spoiler of your everyday and ongoing experience. And often anxiety is what we might, the physical response to anxiety is below what we might call the kind of out-and-out fear response. And yet, that's not always true, and yet anxiety and fear, the fear of tigers, are the same physical response. Both evoke the fight or flight response. I'm sure you've heard of it, and it's a very, very useful way that your body prepares for action, either to fight or to flee. But you know, in normal everyday life, we don't experience life-threatening situations all that often, unless we put ourselves into them, of course. And even then, because it's voluntary and we still feel that we have control over it, it's not really a fear-invoking situation in the way that anxiety or being confronted with a wild animal might be. When you perceive that you're threatened in some way, your body releases a cascade of hormones into your system, and these have physiological consequences. And these consequences are the most obvious characteristics of anxiety that pretty much everyone would recognize. The common physical characteristics of anxiety are familiar to everyone. In the first instance, you might experience muscle tension. Now that can be experienced as cramp or just sort of tension in the shoulders or wherever, because your body's getting ready, it's getting tensed, ready for action. Your heart rate's going to change, it's going to pump more blood. Your blood pressure might vary, your pulse might vary, but you know what? You're going to actually just have more blood pumped around your muscles, getting ready to run or to fight. Your breathing's going to be changed because you're probably going to be breathing more shallowly, and that can have other knock-on consequences, such as making you feel lightheaded or dizzy. Your body starts to sweat as you uprate your metabolism, ready to fight any threat. Your mouth goes dry as a consequence of the hormones that are released through your body. And you know, very, very commonly people report butterflies in the stomach. Now, there are other physical consequences to anxiety, but they are some of the most commonly experienced, and everybody will have experienced some of these at some point in their lives. The fight or flight system is beautifully designed to help you to escape from actual, real threat and danger. It's part of our genetic heritage, and I'm sure it's saved many people when they're confronted with a saber-toothed tiger. But with anxiety, it's difficult to know when the threat has passed. You see, when there's an actual threat and you escape from the threat, it's obvious that you're now safe. But with anxiety, it's very difficult to know when you're safe. And often people report that they only feel safe perhaps in bed or in their bedroom or at home. But they generally don't feel safe, and therefore they don't get respite from the fight or flight system, which means that often your body is flooded with these hormones, and that you become actually quite used to feeling anxious. You become used to the experience of being anxious. The problem is that you then become very watchful and wary about things which exacerbate or kick off the anxiety response again. If you don't know what's making you feel anxious, you're going to be very watchful and wary to find out what it is that's so threatening to you. Now, because you're used to feeling anxious, your body can elicit this anxiety response in many cases without any actual threat occurring, and it could just become habitual, which means that you start to associate the anxiety-provoking response with things which actually are not anxiety-provoking at all. Things like chatting to other people, or shopping, or crowds, or busy streets, or eating out in a restaurant. None of these things themselves are likely to be life-threatening, and yet they can become associated with feelings of anxiety, and they can evoke that anxiety response themselves. Now, irrespective of what it is which is causing your sense of anxiety, it's quite clear from a cognitive behaviour therapy point of view that we can map out some of the causes of it, and these will typically apply to many examples of anxiety. Any thought you have that focuses on threat switches on the fight or flight system. Thoughts that you might have might include, I'm in danger, I'm threatened, I can't cope, I can't do this. People will see me, I'm uncomfortable, what if people recognize that I'm anxious? These thoughts create unpleasant bodily sensations such as sweating, heart racing, breathing faster, flushing. That's going to make you have feelings of fear, trepidation, anxiety. You're just going to feel very uncomfortable, and you're going to want to run away or escape or avoid or hide from the threat. None of this is pleasant, and of course it just makes living more problematic. Once anxiety becomes quite habitual, it makes living a normal life quite difficult, because many of the experiences that you might consider to be normal seem, for some reason or other, to start to feel threatening. The longer term consequences of anxiety are that you start to restrict your life. You start to use strategies which will help you to feel a little bit safer, and these generally include avoiding things. The trouble is that if you constrict your life enough, it actually becomes quite difficult to just engage in mundane life activities. Now that's what I call an example of false control, because it gives control of your anxiety to external stimuli. Real control, of course, is to recognize that the external world, eating out, dining, talking to people, shopping and crowds, are not in themselves anxiety provoking. So real control, therefore, is to challenge the anxiety-provoking feelings themselves. Is to recognize that the anxiety-provoking sensations are not in themselves dangerous, are simply consequences of appraising whatever it is you're doing as anxiety-provoking. Now, commonly people report that they're not able to know why they feel anxious. They just feel anxious. And often that's classified as what's called generalized anxiety disorder, a pervasive sense of unease, but without being focused on anything in particular. It's absolutely crucial to figure out what it is which is creating this sense of anxiety and challenge that, as opposed to constricting your life and reducing the things that you do, because that is not, in the end, any solution to anxiety.